Norway. What magic the word invokes. The very sound of it conjures up images of its magnificent, majestic fjords. A landscape that is without parallel worldwide. In the eyes of many, this is paradise. Of all Norway's fjords, Geiranger is the most famous. The little town of Geiranger is the oldest tourist destination in Norway. Most visitors arrive by ship. They disembark for a short while to buy souvenirs. Or they transfer to coaches for a brief excursion into the mountains. More than a century of tourism was bound to have an impact on this settlement. And indeed, Geiranger has a few over-large hotels, a few souvenir stalls too many, and a fjord museum built in a rather bold style. Nevertheless, Geiranger has remained the village it always was. On May the 17th, Norway's national holiday, the inhabitants of Geiranger stage a parade. Sporting expensive traditional costumes, everybody turns out to march and cheer. The people celebrate Norway's independence from Denmark and the drawing up of the Norwegian constitution in 1814. They also celebrate the end of the long Nordic winter. The season hasn't really got underway as yet. The villagers still have the place to themselves. Wilhelm II, the last German monarch and the father of all Norway tourists. This portrait of the Kaiser and his spouse hangs in the Hotel Union, along with a painting of his yacht, the Hohenzollern, in which he embarked on a Nordic voyage year after year. Wilhelm I loved Norway. And for that reason, people here won't have a word said against him. This obelisk at the Hotel Utsikten, the former Hotel Bellevue, is dedicated to Wilhelm, the Geiranger enthusiast. Unlike most tourists today, Wilhelm knew that Norway is not only beautiful, but also dangerous. In 1904, when the town of Ålesund, not far from here, burnt down, Wilhelm rapidly sent provisions. And he made a donation to Geiranger itself, when in 1907 an avalanche swept away a farmhouse at its very spot. Recorded on the back of the obelisk are the names of the dead, young and old. The few survivors emigrated to America, like so many other Norwegians. It's hard to imagine how people here used to live. Yet the shores of the fjords and the upland valleys above them have been inhabited for 5,000 years or even longer. This is the ancient route between Geiranger and the hamlet of Eidsal. The Communal Way, an old farmer calls it. But who built the path? And who was the last person to use it? Here in the north, it seems, the past is consigned to history far more thoroughly than in other places. Today, there are modern roads almost everywhere. Year after year, new tunnels are driven through the mountains. Soon all places in Norway will be accessible in winter too, or abandoned. Abandoned like this farm, the Blomberg, which stands on a cliff 450 meters above the fjord. It can only be reached via a steep footpath, which is overgrown or buried time and again. The ships in the fjord seem close enough to touch, yet they belong to another world. The climb up to Geiranger Fjord, another abandoned farm. The narrow flight of steps cut into the rock can't be seen from the fjord. Whoever lived up here was his own master, a little king, ruler over a barren empire. But it meant foregoing anything that couldn't be carried 250 meters up the cliff face. In the past, hardly anyone was interested in the old farmhouses. Every now and then, lovers would carve their names in the old beams, while the occasional hikers, tourists, would take away whatever they could carry as a souvenir. But the bed, measuring 1.70 meters by 1.10 meters, remained. Ole Andreas Rasmussen and Lovisa Larsdatter, Geiranger Fjord, 1871. What must it have been like for a young girl like Lovisa Larsdatter to come to this isolated farm with its tiny bed and spend the rest of her life here? Geiranger Fjord is being restored, in part rebuilt to make it look the way it did in its past. Well, roughly at least. The cost is being borne mainly by a Friends of the Fjord Association. Indeed, the remote farms high above the fjord have been rediscovered. They no longer stand for poverty and isolation, for a life of troubles and danger. Instead, they have become places of historical importance, part of the nation's cultural heritage. Today, though, building material isn't laboriously hauled up as in the past, but flown in by helicopter. Geiranger Fjord seen from the property of the nearest neighbour, from the Knivsfjord farm on the north side of the fjord. Knivsfjord was abandoned more than 100 years ago because of the threat from an overhanging cliff. But the feared avalanche never happened. Slowly, Knivsfjord fell into disrepair. Today its owner looks after the farm with great devotion. Sometimes visitors arrive. Recently, even Norway's Queen spent a night here. In her entry in the guestbook, she describes the surrounding nature as majestic. What must it be like to sleep in this bed? To wake up in the morning, look out of the window, and say to yourself, I am the queen here. This is my land. Early in the morning, Hohenzollern has to set out again to bring in his nets, for the last time. Only in the winter is he a fisherman. In the summer, he's the harbour master. He sees to it that the huge ocean-going cruise ships are moored off Geiranger and brings their passengers ashore. Really, though, he's a seaman. Lauritz has seen the world. But nothing, he says, compares with the fjords.